Welcome to Enigma of the Unknown, where we uncover the eerie and the unexplained lurking within everyday life. As Christmas draws near, snowmen appear in yards and parks across America, symbols of winter fun and holiday cheer. But tonight, we'll be exploring a different kind of snowman, a figure cloaked in mystery and horror. In this video, we'll reveal real-life stories of snowmen that brought fear, not joy, to Christmas in America. Get comfortable and prepare yourself for tales that will make you think twice about building your own snowman this season. Story number 1. The Snowman with a Black Heart in Michigan, 2001. In the winter of 2001, the small town of Evergreen, Michigan, was gripped by a biting cold. Thick snow covered every road, rooftop, and field. The sky was bleak and heavy with low-hanging clouds, as if something ominous were about to unfold. Still, the Christmas spirit filled the air as houses glowed with colorful lights, and a large Christmas tree stood proudly in the town square. In a cozy wooden house on the edge of town, the Anderson family was busy preparing for Christmas. Mark Anderson, a 45-year-old engineer with bright eyes and a warm smile, was seated at his drafting table, working on a special project. His wife, Linda, a gentle woman with long brown hair, was decorating the Christmas tree in the living room. Their 15-year-old son, Ethan, was absorbed in assembling a new science kit he'd received, while their 12-year-old daughter, Sophie, was playing with their golden retriever, Max. Everyone, let's do something really special for Christmas this year, Mark suggested, his eyes lighting up with excitement. What do you have in mind, Dad? Ethan looked up, curious. The town is holding a Christmas decoration contest. Let's build a giant snowman. The biggest one ever, Mark said enthusiastically. That sounds amazing, Sophie squealed. I've always wanted to make a huge snowman. I think that's a wonderful idea, Linda smiled. It'll be so much fun for all of us to work on together. And so, the family set their plan in motion. They gathered supplies, bundled up warmly, and headed out into the yard, where the snow lay nearly half a meter deep. The cold wind cut through the air, but it did nothing to dampen their spirits. We need to roll some really big snowballs, Mark instructed. Ethan, you help me with the body. Sophie, you and Mom can work on the head. The family worked enthusiastically, rolling massive snowballs that were heavy and cumbersome. But the teamwork and laughter made the effort seem easy. After a few hours, a towering snowman, over 10 feet tall, took shape, standing proudly in their yard. Wow, this is incredible, Ethan exclaimed, admiring their creation. But we need to make it extra special, Mark said, bringing out some mechanical equipment he had prepared in advance. What are you going to do, Dad? Sophie asked, her eyes wide with wonder. I'm adding a few special effects. Night, our snowman will light up, Mark explained as he attached small LED lights to the snowman. That's awesome, Linda praised him. You're always so creative. These eyes will be made of black stones for a striking look, Mark said, placing 2 dark stones where the eyes would go. They added a carrot nose and a red knitted hat on top of the snowman's head. As evening fell, the Andersons' giant snowman looked stunning. The LED lights glowed, casting a warm, twinkling light across the yard. Neighbors began to notice and offered words of admiration. The Anderson snowman is fantastic, one neighbor said. They're sure to win the top prize this year. Another agreed. The Andersons headed back inside, pleased with their hard work. They gathered around the fireplace, enjoying hot chocolate and sharing stories. I think our snowman is truly special, Sophie said, her eyes sparkling. Yes, I think we did a great job, Mark agreed. It feels quieter around town this year than in past years, Linda observed, glancing out the window. Maybe it's just the cold. Yes, the forecast says it'll snow even more tonight, Ethan added, checking his computer. We should turn in early. We've got a busy day tomorrow, Linda suggested. Everyone agreed and prepared for bed. Outside, the wind began to pick up, carrying large snowflakes with it. The sky was pitch black, with no moon or stars in sight. Felt like a storm was brewing. That night, an unexpected snowstorm struck, one that hadn't been predicted. The wind howled, snow fell thickly, blanketing everything in a layer of white. The windows shook under the wind's force, but the Anderson family slept soundly, unaware of the storm's fury outside. The next morning, the dim sunlight struggled through thick clouds. Mark was the first to wake up, and as he looked out the window, he was shocked by what he saw. "So much snow. We're practically buried," he exclaimed. The family quickly gathered in the living room. "Mom, Dad, look at that," Sophie pointed outside. Their giant snowman was still standing, but something was amiss. A dark streak ran down from its head to its base, like a deep crack. In the chest area, there was a cluster of dark snow, forming what looked like a black heart. "What is that?" Ethan asked, puzzled. "Maybe it's soot from the chimney blown over by the wind," Linda speculated. "That's unlikely. The distance between the chimney and the snowman is too far." Mark replied, "Let's go outside and take a closer look," he suggested. They put on their winter gear and trudged outside. The snow was knee-deep, making it difficult to walk. As they approached the snowman, they realized that the black streak wasn't soot or dirt. "It looks like black snow," Ethan observed, brushing his fingers over the dark patch. His finger came away with a bit of cold. Sticky black snow. "This is really strange. Black snow? That's not normal," Mark said, furrowing his brow. "This is scary," Sophie whispered, gripping her mother's hand tightly. "It's okay, sweetheart. It's probably just some natural phenomenon," Linda reassured her. "We'll investigate it more thoroughly later. Let's go back inside for now." "It's freezing out here," Mark suggested. They returned to the warmth of the house, but a sense of unease settled over them. Breakfast was unusually quiet as each family member pondered the strange black streak on the snowman. "Maybe we should try to clear the black streak off. It might affect the contest," Mark finally said, breaking the silence. "I'll help, Dad," Ethan volunteered. "No, you stay inside. I'll handle it," Mark replied, not wanting his son to touch the black snow. Mark went back outside with a shovel and some tools. When he tried to scrape off the black streak, the black snow clung to the snowman, refusing to budge. The more he tried, the wider the black streak seemed to spread. "This is impossible," Mark muttered when he touched the black area. A chill seeped through his gloves, like he was touching solid ice. Shivering, he decided to stop. "Maybe we'll have to wait for warmer weather to get rid of this," he thought, heading back inside. "Did it work, Dad?" Linda asked. "Not yet. That black snow is stuck fast to the snowman." "It's odd," Mark replied. "Maybe we should call the contest organizers and ask if anyone else has experienced this," Ethan suggested. "That's a good idea. I'll give them a call," Mark agreed. However, after contacting the organizers and asking around the neighborhood, they found that no one else had encountered anything similar. The other snowmen were all completely normal. "This is so strange," Linda said, worry evident on her face. "It's probably just a temporary phenomenon. Let's not worry too much," Mark tried to reassure his family. But that night, after everyone had gone to bed, Ethan couldn't sleep. Lying there, he thought about the eerie black streak and the chill that came from touching it. He decided to head downstairs and look up information on black snow. Black snow is a rare phenomenon, usually caused by pollution or volcanic eruptions. He read, but that couldn't happen here in Michigan. Suddenly, a strong gust of wind rattled the window. Ethan looked outside and saw the snowman standing tall in the darkness, the black streak appearing even darker. He had the unsettling feeling that the snowman's black stone eyes were staring directly at him. A shiver ran down his spine, and he quickly drew the curtains closed, deciding to go back to his room. "It's just my imagination," he told himself, trying to calm down. The next day, Michigan's sky was still bleak, with heavy dark clouds obscuring the sun. Cold winds rustled the bare branches, creating eerie whispers like the voices of lost souls. The Anderson family woke up and began preparing for the day, unaware that darkness was slowly creeping into their lives. When Mark stepped outside to check on the snowman, he noticed something strange. A faint thudding sound, like a heartbeat, pulsed quietly in the air. He stopped, listening carefully. "It's probably just a distant noise," he reassured himself. Linda came out carrying a hot cup of coffee. "What are you listening to?" she asked, noticing her husband standing still. "Do you hear that sound?" Mark asked, a thoughtful look on his face. Linda paused and listened, but only heard the wind. "No, I don't hear anything. Is something wrong?" "No, I'm probably imagining it." Mark gave a small smile, though he still felt uneasy inside. As the family gathered at the breakfast table, Ethan brought up the dark streak on the snowman. "Dad, I think we should find out more about the black snow. I looked online, but couldn't find any information that matches what we saw." "Don't worry too much. I'm sure it's just a natural phenomenon," Mark replied, but his expression betrayed a hint of concern. "Sophie, are you okay? You look tired," Linda asked her daughter, noticing her unusually quiet demeanor. "Last night, I dreamed that the snowman was moving," Sophie whispered. "It came closer to my window, and I heard a thudding sound." Ethan looked at his sister, a chill running down his spine. "You heard it too?" "You heard it?" Sophie asked, surprised. "No, but maybe we should check the snowman again," Ethan suggested. Mark glanced at his children, feeling a surge of worry. "All right, we'll go take another look after breakfast." When the whole family stood before the snowman, the thudding sound was unmistakable, like the steady beat of a heartbeat, coming from inside the snowman. The dark streak near its heart seemed deeper, like a gaping wound. "This isn't normal," Mark admitted. "We need to understand what's causing it." Ethan stepped closer and placed his hand on the dark spot. He felt a freezing chill, but also something else. "I can feel the heartbeat," he said, his voice trembling. "Sophie, don't get too close." Linda pulled her daughter back, fear in her eyes. "We should destroy it," Ethan suggested. "There's something wrong with this snowman." Mark hesitated, then nodded. "All right, maybe that's for the best." They brought out shovels and other tools, attempting to break apart the snowman. But as they struck it, the black snow clung to their tools and even their hands. It felt almost alive, wrapping around them and pulling them closer. "Oh my God, it won't melt," Linda cried, desperately trying to shake off the black snow. But it wouldn't budge. "Everyone, step back. Don't touch it anymore," Mark ordered, trying to keep calm. Ethan looked at his hand, where the black snow seemed to be moving, slipping into the gaps in his glove. A chilling sensation ran down his spine, as if the snow itself were alive. "Everyone inside, now!" Mark shouted. They rushed back inside and shut the door tightly. They tried washing off the black snow, but it clung to their skin, refusing to melt, even in warm water. "This can't be happening," Linda panicked. "What are we supposed to do?" "We need help. I'll call the police or someone," Mark decided. When Mark picked up the phone, he realized he had no signal. "The phone's not working. I'll try the internet," Ethan suggested. Ethan opened his laptop, but the internet connection was down too. "No internet. We're completely cut off." "This can't be a coincidence," Sophie murmured, staring out the window. "The snowman, it's watching us." The family turned to look. Through the frosted glass, they could see the snowman standing tall, its dark eyes gleaming strangely. The black spot near its heart seemed to pulse more intensely, emitting a faint glow. "We need to get out of here," Linda said, her voice shaking. "Our car is buried under snow. We can't go anywhere," Mark replied, feeling helpless. That night, The Andersons tried to stay calm. They gathered in the living room by the fire. But the warmth did nothing to dispel the creeping chill. The thudding heartbeat from the snowman echoed, like the rhythm of some dark, living heart. "I can't stand it anymore," Sophie sobbed. "I'm scared." "Ethan, take Sophie to her room to rest," Linda suggested. "All right, Mom," Ethan agreed, taking his sister's hand and leading her upstairs. With just the two of them left, Mark and Linda looked at each other, worry etched on their faces. "What do you think we're dealing with here?" Linda whispered. "I don't know, but this is definitely not normal," Mark replied, his face serious. "What did we do to deserve this?" "I don't know. Maybe we should go to the neighbors for help. But we can't reach anyone. I'll try going outside and heading to their house." "No, you can't go out there. It's too dangerous." Mark thought for a moment and then nodded. "All right, we'll wait until morning." The next morning, weak sunlight filtered through the curtains, and Linda woke up to find small, wet black footprints on the floor. Tiny footprints, like a child's, led from the front door to each bedroom. "Mark, come here. Quick!" she screamed, her voice filled with terror. Mark ran upstairs and saw the unsettling sight before him. What on earth is happening? Ethan and Sophie were awake too, horrified to see the footprints leading into their rooms. "Did someone get into our house?" Ethan asked, his voice trembling. "No one's here. The doors were all locked," Mark said, checking the locks. "Then what are these footprints?" Sophie cried. "We have to leave immediately," Linda decided. They hurriedly packed up, but when they stepped outside, they saw that the black snow had completely surrounded the house, blocking their path. "We're trapped," Mark said, feeling a wave of despair. The thudding heartbeat from the snowman grew louder, as if the black heart was furious. They felt a slight tremor in the house, and the furniture began to shake. "We can't stay here any longer," Linda screamed. "I'll find a way out," Mark said, a determined look on his face. Ethan had an idea. "Dad, maybe we could try burning the snowman. Fire might destroy it." "That might be our only option," Mark agreed. They gathered gasoline and matches, preparing to face the terrifying snowman. As they stepped outside, the black snow clung to their feet, making them feel heavy and sluggish. "Hurry," Mark urged. They poured gasoline over the snowman, but as soon as they lit a match, the flames were immediately snuffed out. The black snow seemed to absorb the fire, completely unaffected. "This can't be," Ethan whispered in horror. Suddenly, the snowman turned its head, its dark eyes staring directly at them. A twisted smile appeared on its icy face, sending a chill through their bones. "Run!" Mark yelled. The family rushed back inside, slamming the door shut. The thudding heartbeat grew louder, as if the black heart were pounding with rage, shaking the house. "What are we supposed to do?" Linda cried. Mark looked around and came up with an idea. "We can try escaping through the old underground tunnel beneath the house. That tunnel has been abandoned for years," Ethan reminded him. "But it's our only chance." They quickly gathered what they needed and headed into the narrow, cold, and damp passage. They moved through the darkness, guided only by dim flashlights. The heartbeat still echoed, but it grew fainter as they ventured deeper into the tunnel. Eventually, they emerged at the edge of town. "We made it!" Sophie shouted with relief, but her joy was short-lived. Ahead of them, the snowman reappeared as if it had been waiting. His black heart pulsed, and a faint glow emitted from its deep, dark eyes. "This can't be. It's moving," Ethan gasped in terror. "Run that way." Mark pointed toward the road leading into town. They ran with all their might, leaving the monstrous snowman behind. When they reached a neighbor's house, they knocked frantically on the door. Mr. Thomas opened it, looking at them with a surprised expression. "What's going on? Please help us. Something is chasing us," Mark said, panting. Mr. Thomas invited them inside, but when they looked back, The snowman had vanished. "There's no one out there," Mr. Thomas said, glancing outside. "But we saw it. It's not an ordinary snowman," Linda explained. Mr. Thomas gave them a skeptical look. "You must all be exhausted. Take a moment to rest." The Andersons realized that no one believed them. They decided to leave the town immediately. They rented a car and drove away that night, leaving behind their home and the terrifying snowman. As they drove further, looking back through the rearview mirror, they saw the snowman standing on a hill, its dark eyes watching them. The black heart continued to beat, each pulse a chilling reminder of what they had escaped from. The sky over Michigan remained overcast, with dark clouds blocking out the sun, casting a cold and heavy atmosphere. The Anderson family had escaped their house through the old tunnel, but the haunting of the black-hearted snowman still lingered. They found a small hotel in a neighboring town to rest and process everything that had happened. In the hotel room, tension filled the air. Mark sat by the window, staring outside with a troubled expression. Linda was quietly praying, hoping the nightmare would end. Ethan and Sophie sat close together on the bed, their faces showing exhaustion and fear. "We can't go on like this." Linda finally broke the silence. "We need to figure out what's happening to us." "You're right," Mark replied, turning to look at his wife. "I think we should find a specialist in supernatural phenomena or someone who can help us." "But who would believe what we've been through?" Ethan asked, his voice filled with doubt. "We have to try," Linda insisted. "We can't let this thing destroy our family." The next day, Mark went to the local library to research the area's history and possibly find some clues. Meanwhile, Linda, Ethan, and Sophie stayed at the hotel, trying to rest, but even in their sleep, they couldn't escape the nightmares. At the library, Mark met an elderly woman named Agnes, a librarian who had worked there for over 30 years. "Looking for something?" she asked, noticing Mark poring over dusty old books. "Yes, I'm researching the Evergreen area, where my family lives," Mark replied. "Something strange is happening." Agnes looked at him for a moment, then whispered, "You're not the first to tell me that. Evergreen has a dark history few know about. Please, tell me more," Mark urged, his voice filled with hope. "Legend says that hundreds of years ago, the area was the site of dark rituals. One of these involved winter sacrifices made to ensure prosperity. The spirits of those sacrificed never found peace, and they haunt the land to this day." Mark felt a chill run down his spine. "Do you think this has something to do with a snowman with a black heart?" Agnes gasped. "A snowman with a black heart? That's the mark of the curse. Whoever creates it awakens the cursed spirits." "Oh my God," Mark murmured. "We built a giant snowman, and a strange dark mark appeared on it, resembling a heart. You need to leave that place immediately," Agnes warned. "The curse has started, and it won't stop until it takes what it wants." "What does it want?" "Usually, it seeks suffering and the souls of those connected to it." Mark returned to the hotel, his face pale. He recounted everything to his family, worry etched into each of their faces. "So, what do we do?" Linda asked, her voice trembling. "We can't go back to that house. We need to leave here as soon as possible," Mark decided. "But what if the curse follows us?" Ethan wondered. "We'll find a safer place and seek help from those who can deal with this," Mark assured his son. The family agreed, quickly packing their belongings. They checked out of the hotel and hit the road, hoping that distance would free them from the curse's reach. As they drove, snow began to fall heavily, the sky darkened, and strong winds shook the car. "The weather's getting worse," Linda said, concerned. "I'll slow down," Mark replied, focusing on the road. Suddenly, Sophie screamed, "Mom, Dad, look!" In the middle of the road ahead, the snowman appeared, standing tall with its black heart pounding fiercely. Its dark, hollow eyes stared straight at them, as if piercing into their souls. "This can't be. How did it get here?" Ethan cried in horror. Mark slammed on the brakes, causing the car to skid on the icy road. "Hold on," he shouted. The car spun and stopped by the side of the road. Luckily, no one was hurt. When they looked back, the snowman had vanished. "What's happening to us?" Linda whispered, terrified. "We have to keep going," Mark said, resolutely starting the car again. After hours of driving through treacherous weather, they reached another small town. They found a motel and decided to stay the night. Exhausted and tense, everyone soon fell asleep. But during the night, each of them was plagued by nightmares. They found themselves trapped in an endless field of snow, with the rhythmic thudding echoing from all directions. The snowman approached, its black heart beating violently as if it wanted to consume them. The next morning, the family woke up with tired, anxious expressions. "I can't take this anymore," Linda said, tears streaming down her face. "The curse is following us. We need to end this somehow," Mark said, gripping her hand tightly. "But how?" Ethan asked. "We don't know what to do. I remember Agnes said that the spirit wants our suffering and our souls," Linda recalled. "We can't let it take those," Mark said firmly. "Maybe we need to confront it." The family decided to return to Evergreen, understanding the risks. They believed that facing the snowman and the curse was the only way to end this nightmare. When they returned to their house, everything looked abandoned. Black snow covered the ground. Surrounding trees were withered, and the air felt heavy and oppressive. "What do we do now?" Sophie asked, her voice shaking. "We'll destroy the snowman again, but this time, we'll do it differently," Mark said, his eyes shining with determination. "I've brought some electronic equipment from the car." They approached the snowman, which looked more menacing than ever. His black heart thudded loudly, the sound echoing through the eerie silence. Mark set up devices around the snowman, hoping that the electromagnetic pulses would disrupt its strange structure. "Everyone, step back," he warned. He activated the equipment. A powerful electric surge pulsed out, directed straight at the snowman. For a moment, the snowman trembled, and the black snow started to melt. "We did it," Ethan shouted in relief, but their joy was short-lived. Suddenly, the snowman let out a horrifying scream. A black mist exploded from it, knocking them back. When they stood up, the snowman was gone, but the cold, oppressive atmosphere lingered. "Is it over?" Linda asked, hopeful. "I'm not sure, but at least we destroyed it," Mark replied, breathing heavily. However, that night, as they tried to rest, the thudding heartbeat sounded again, louder than ever. The house began to shake, furniture falling over. "No, it's not over," Ethan screamed. The family gathered in the living room, terrified and desperate. Suddenly, the front door flew open, and a gust of icy wind swept inside, carrying flakes of black snow. The snowman appeared at the doorstep, his dark eyes fixed on them. "We need to get out of here now," Mark shouted. They ran out of the house, but the snowman seemed to appear at every turn. They fled into the forest, hoping to escape. In a leering, they found themselves surrounded by dark shadows. Whispers filled the air. "There is no escape. There is no escape." Linda clung to her children, tears streaming down her face. "Please, leave us alone." Mark stepped forward, shielding his family. "If you want a soul, take mine. Just leave my family alone." The snowman moved closer, but suddenly, a ray of sunlight broke through the dark clouds, shining directly on its black heart. It began to melt, the heartbeat slowing down. "Look," Sophie pointed. The snowman slowly dissolved, leaving only a puddle of black water on the ground. The air lightened, and the whispers faded away. "What just happened?" Ethan asked, bewildered. The sunlight, maybe that was the curse's weakness. Mark speculated. The family embraced each other, a wave of relief washing over them. "Maybe it's finally over," Linda whispered, After that ordeal, the Anderson family decided to leave Evergreen forever. They moved to a distant place, far from snow and away from those haunting memories. Their house in Evergreen was left abandoned, and no one dared to go near it. The townspeople spoke of the haunted house and the snowman with a black heart, warning others to stay away. But one cold winter night, a curious child wandered past the abandoned home. In the yard, they spotted a faint figure, a small snowman with a pulsing black heart. The story ends with the snowman reappearing, hinting that the curse was never truly broken. Did the Anderson family really escape, or would the darkness continue to follow them? Story number 2. The Mysterious Snowman of North Dakota, 1964. In the winter of 1964, the small, secluded town in North Dakota lay blanketed in a biting cold. Thick snow covered every road, rooftop, and field as far as the eye could see. The dim light from a few street lamps cast an atmosphere both peaceful and somber. Christmas was in the air, but the silence of the countryside added a lonely touch to the season. In a small wooden house on the town's edge, Margaret Thompson awoke with the first rays of sunlight filtering through the curtains. She was a retired schoolteacher, living alone since her husband passed away a few years ago. Her face bore the marks of time, yet her deep blue eyes still held a sharp intelligence and strength. But loneliness always crept into her heart, especially during the holidays. Margaret wrapped herself in a thick wool coat and went down to the kitchen to prepare a hot cup of tea. The fireplace crackled, radiating a comfortable warmth. She sat by the window, watching the snow fall quietly. Everything seemed peaceful until her gaze landed on the front yard. "What is that?" she murmured, frowning. In the middle of her yard stood a large snowman, seemingly built overnight. But the strange thing was, she hadn't made it, and no friends or family had come to visit. She lived alone, and the nearest neighbor was several hundred yards away. The snowman was crafted with surprising detail, much taller than any ordinary snowman. But what sent a chill down Margaret's spine was its face. Its hollow eyes, like two deep, empty pits, were made of dark stones. The mouth, twisted in a disturbing grin, was lined with irregular pieces of coal arranged in a way that made it look anything but friendly. An old, ragged scarf and battered hat only added to its eerie appearance. Margaret stood up and leaned closer to the window for a better look. Who would do such a thing? She wondered. Could it have been a prank by the town's children? But on such a frigid Christmas Eve, it was hard to imagine anyone venturing out to build such a frightening snowman. She tried to shake off the unsettling feeling. It's probably just a harmless prank, she told herself. No need to overthink it. She continued with her morning routine, preparing breakfast and reading the newspaper. But she couldn't help glancing at the window, where the snowman stood motionless in the snowy yard. It seemed as if those hollow eyes were watching her every move, filling her with a growing sense of discomfort. By midday, Margaret decided to go outside for a closer look. She bundled up in her heavy coat, hat, and gloves and stepped out into the yard. The icy wind bit at her skin, and tiny snowflakes settled in her silver hair. Each step left a deep impression in the thick snow as she approached the snowman. Standing before it, she felt an uncanny presence. It was nearly as tall as she was, with a solid, imposing figure. Tentatively, she reached out to touch its arm. The freezing cold seeped through her glove, as if she were touching ancient, solid ice. "This is so strange," she murmured. "Who could have made such a snowman?" She looked around but saw no signs of anyone else, no footprints other than her own. The mystery deepened, leaving her even more unsettled. Back inside, she still felt uneasy. She decided to call her neighbor, Helen, to ask if she knew anything. "Hello, Margaret. Merry Christmas." Helen greeted her cheerfully. "Hello, Helen. Merry Christmas. I wanted to ask you about something," Margaret replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "What's going on?" "Someone built a snowman in my yard last night. Do you know who it might have been?" "A snowman?" No, I don't know anything about that. Maybe it was some kids in town? Yes, maybe. Thank you. Helen. Ending the call. Margaret felt no better. She decided to brush it off, convincing herself it was just a harmless prank. That evening, she locked her doors carefully and drew the curtains tightly closed. But the feeling of being watched didn't go away. Lying in bed, she couldn't fall asleep. The image of the snowman with its hollow eyes and unsettling grin kept appearing in her mind. "It's just my imagination," she whispered. "I shouldn't let trivial things get to me." Eventually, she drifted into a restless sleep. The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight crept through her curtains, Margaret woke up feeling exhausted. She resolved to destroy the snowman and put an end to her unease. She dressed warmly, grabbed a shovel, and stepped outside. But as she reached the spot where the snowman stood, she was shocked to find it still perfectly intact, showing no signs of melting, despite the slight increase in temperature. "This can't be," she whispered. She began striking the snowman with her shovel. Yet, strangely, each strike felt as though it were hitting something solid. The snowman didn't shatter or crumble, no matter how hard she tried. Worn out and shaken, Margaret stepped back, her heart pounding. What is going on here? A chill ran down her spine. Looking around once more, she still saw no one. The eerie silence hung over everything. She retreated inside, locking the door behind her, and sank into her chair, trying to gather her thoughts. "I can't explain this. Perhaps I should ask someone for help." She picked up the phone, but the line suddenly filled with static, leaving only an ominous buzzing sound. This can't be. The phone was working fine. Her anxiety only grew as she realized something was deeply wrong. It felt as if she were trapped in a nightmare with no escape. The sky over North Dakota was filled with gray clouds, blocking the faint winter sunlight. The temperature had risen slightly, and snow had started to melt from the rooftops and tree branches. Margaret woke up after a restless night, feeling a heavy exhaustion weighing on her. The eerie image of the mysterious snowman continued to haunt her mind. She decided she couldn't let this situation continue. "I have to do something," she told herself. After drinking a hot cup of tea to calm her nerves, she put on a thick coat, gloves, and a wool hat, gripping a sturdy shovel. She opened the door and stepped outside. The snowman was still there, standing as ominously as before. Its hollow eyes seemed to stare right at her, and its grim smile looked mocking. The snow around it had partially melted, but the snowman itself remained perfectly intact. "This is impossible," she muttered. Margaret moved closer, took a deep breath, and raised the shovel, striking it forcefully against the snowman. The sound of metal hitting something hard echoed, but the snowman didn't crack or break. She struck again, harder this time, but still, nothing happened. Cold sweat broke out on her forehead, and she felt her arms begin to ache. "It can't be," she whispered, her face showing a mix of shock and fear. She tried using the edge of the shovel to scrape away at the snowman's surface, but the blade slid over it as if it were slick, solid ice. When she touched it with her gloved hand, a chilling cold penetrated through her glove, spreading through her whole body. It felt as though she was touching something that didn't belong to this world. Margaret stepped back, her heart racing. "I need help," she decided. She retreated into the house, closed the door firmly, and picked up the phone to call her neighbor, Mr. Peterson, a reliable and friendly man. "Hello, Mrs. Margaret. Is everything okay?" Mr. Peterson's voice came over the line. "Hello, I need your help. Could you come over for a bit?" She tried to keep her voice calm. "Of course, I'll be right there." A few minutes later, there was a knock on the door. Margaret opened it and welcomed Mr. Peterson inside. "What's going on, Mrs. Margaret? You look a bit worried. Come with me outside, and I'll explain," she replied, leading him to the front yard. Upon seeing the snowman, Mr. Peterson looked surprised. "Oh, who made the snowman? It looks impressive." "That's the problem. Margaret explained, "I didn't make it, and I don't know who did. Moreover, I can't destroy it. Can you try?" Mr. Peterson raised an eyebrow but nodded. "All right, let me give it a shot." He took the shovel from her, lifted it, and struck the snowman hard. But just like before, the snowman remained undamaged. "Strange," he said, attempting a few more hits, but all in vain. "It feels like it's made of stone or something," he speculated. "But it's clearly snow." Margaret protested. "Touch it. You'll feel it too." Mr. Peterson placed his hand on the snowman, immediately pulling it back. "It's freezing. Feels like touching dry ice." Yesterday, the temperature rose, and the snow around started melting, but this snowman remained completely intact, she explained. Mr. Peterson looked thoughtful. "Maybe someone's playing a prank on you. I'll ask around town and see if anyone knows anything." "Thank you. I'm really worried." That afternoon, Margaret decided to take a walk around town, hoping to find some clue, but everyone was busy preparing for Christmas, and nobody seemed to notice or care about her situation. When she mentioned the snowman, they either shook their heads or chuckled, suggesting she was just overthinking. Returning home with a heavy heart, she felt lonelier than ever. Darkness began to settle in, and the cold wind rattled the bare branches, creating eerie sounds. She closed the curtains, trying to avoid looking out at the front yard. That evening, Margaret sat by the fire with her favorite book, but she couldn't focus. Her attention kept drifting to the faint sounds around the house, the creak of the floor, the wind whistling through cracks in the doors, forming a haunting symphony. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. "What now?" she muttered, struggling to get up in the dark. She fumbled for a candle and matches, lighting a small flame. The dim light cast shadows dancing on the walls. Margaret felt as if someone was watching her. "It's just my imagination," she tried to reassure herself. A faint knock sounded at the door, steady and unnerving. She froze, her heart pounding. "Who's there?" she called, but there was no response. The knocking continued, louder this time. She hesitated but decided to approach the door. "Who is it?" No answer, only the wind howling outside, summoning her courage. She opened the door just a crack and peered out. No one was there, just darkness and the biting wind. But as she prepared to close the door, her eyes landed on the snowman. It had moved closer, now standing right by her doorstep. Its hollow eyes seemed to look straight at her, and its twisted smile had widened, revealing sharp stone teeth. She slammed the door shut, stumbling back. This can't be happening. How is this possible? Overwhelmed by fear, she rushed to her bedroom and locked the door. Gripping the candle tightly, she sat down on her bed, trying to steady her breathing. "I have to stay calm. I need to think of what to do." Soft footsteps echoed from the hallway. "It can't be I live alone," she thought. The footsteps grew closer, stopping outside her bedroom door. "Mrs. Margaret," a cold, whispering voice called out. She held her breath, her eyes wide with terror. "Who's there? Is that you?" "Mr. Peterson." Silence, only an eerie quiet, determined not to sit idly. She opened her drawer and took out a pair of scissors for protection. "If anyone's here, I'll call the police." Twisted, childlike laughter rang out, warped and unnatural. Her heart nearly stopped. Suddenly, the door flew open, despite having been locked. A gust of cold air from the hallway extinguished her candle, leaving her in darkness. In the pitch black, she sensed a towering figure standing before her. His hollow eyes glowed faintly. "Go away!" she screamed, swinging the scissors wildly. No response. The figure moved closer, and she felt the chilling cold engulf her. Then, everything went black as she fell into an endless void. The next morning, Margaret woke up in her bed, with sunlight filtering through the curtains. Was it just a dream? She wondered, feeling a deep weariness in her body. But when she stepped into the living room, She noticed the front door wide open. A thin layer of snow had blown in, covering the floor. She shuddered, recalling the events of the previous night. Determined to seek help, she called the police and recounted everything. But they simply chalked it up to stress and advised her to rest. "No one believes me," she sighed, feeling helpless. Looking out the window, she saw the snowman still standing there. This time, his twisted grin seemed even wider, and its hollow eyes had an unnatural gleam. "This can't go on," she resolved. "I have to uncover the truth." Night fell, and the sky over North Dakota turned pitch black, void of stars and moonlight. Cold winds whistled through the cracks of Margaret's house, creating eerie sounds that resembled the whispers of lost souls. She sat by the fireplace, its flickering flames casting strange, ghostly shadows on the walls. Yet, despite the warmth of the fire, she felt a piercing chill deep within her. Strange. The fireplace is working, so why is it still so cold? She muttered, wrapping her scarf tighter around her neck. She checked the thermometer on the wall, only to see the temperature dropping steadily below normal. It can't be. Maybe it's broken. Margaret decided to go to bed early, hoping that a good night's sleep would calm her nerves. After locking the doors securely, she went to her bedroom, lay down, and pulled the blanket tightly around herself. But even with her eyes closed, her thoughts kept drifting back to the strange snowman outside. Eventually, she drifted into a fitful sleep. In her dream, Margaret found herself standing in the middle of a vast, snow-covered field. Around her, a dense fog obscured her view. "Is anyone there?" she called, her voice echoing into the void. Suddenly, a familiar shape appeared in the distance. The snowman with hollow eyes and a twisted grin was coming closer. Each of its steps left deep, dark imprints in the snow, as though it was devouring the light around it. Margaret tried to run, but her legs felt frozen in place. The snowman drew nearer, looming tall and more terrifying than ever. It leaned down, its face mere inches from hers. "Margaret!" A deep, resonant voice echoed as if from a distant place. "Why do you want to destroy me?" She tried to scream, her mouth open but no sound came out. The snowman lifted one icy arm, its frozen fingers grazing her cheek, sending a bone-chilling cold through her body. "I'm lonely, stay with me," it whispered, its breath as cold as a winter storm. Margaret screamed, tempting to back away, but it was futile. The snowman enveloped her, and darkness swallowed everything. Margaret woke up with a start, cold sweat covering her forehead. Her heart was pounding, and she took deep breaths to calm herself. "It was just a dream," she told herself, though the fear still clung to her. Looking around, everything was silent. A weak beam of moonlight filtered through the curtain, casting a faint glow. She glanced at the clock. It read 3 a.m. Then, faint footsteps echoed down the hall. The creaking of the old wooden floor seemed louder in the stillness of the night. She listened intently, trying to determine the source of the sound. "It must be the wind," she reassured herself, though a sense of dread gnawed at her. The footsteps continued, coming closer to her bedroom. She reached for the flashlight on her bedside table, turned it on, and aimed it at the door. The beam of light illuminated a sliver of the hallway, but there was nothing there. "I have to check," she decided, her fear battling with her resolve to find the truth. Margaret quietly slipped out of bed, her bare feet touching the cold wooden floor. Each step she took echoed softly in the silence. Opening her bedroom door, she peered into the long, dark hallway. Her flashlight illuminated only a small part of it, the shadows swallowing everything else. She moved cautiously, her eyes darting around, searching for any sign of movement. "There's no one here," she whispered, yet the feeling of being watched intensified. At the foot of the stairs, she stopped. Strange sounds were coming from the living room, like faint whispers. She moved closer, gripping the flashlight tightly as if it were a weapon. When she entered the living room, She saw that the fire in the fireplace had died down. The room was so cold that her breath formed visible white clouds. Moonlight shone through the window, and in the mirror hanging on the wall, she caught a glimpse of something, the shadow of the snowman, reflected in the mirror. She turned around abruptly but saw nothing. Her heart raced, and she wondered if she was losing her mind. It can't be. I'm just imagining things, she told herself. Determined to return to her room, she turned to leave, but at that moment, a sinister, childlike giggle echoed through the room. Chillingly close, she froze, afraid to look back. "Margaret!" A voice whispered in her ear, icy and haunting. She screamed, sprinting up the stairs and locking herself in her room. Sitting on her bed, she clutched her head and began to sob. What am I supposed to do? Am I losing my mind? The next day, Margaret woke up with puffy eyes and a sense of exhaustion. When she looked in the mirror, her face appeared pale and gaunt. I can't go on like this, she decided. She called Dr. Collins, the town psychologist. Doctor, I need to see you. It's urgent. Of course, Mrs. Margaret. Can you come to my office this afternoon? His warm voice sounded comforting. I'll be there. Thank you. At Dr. Collins's office, she recounted everything that had happened. He listened attentively, occasionally nodding as he took notes. Mrs. Margaret, I understand that you're going through a difficult time. You may be experiencing hallucinations due to stress and loneliness, he said gently. But everything feels so real. Doctor, I feel like someone's watching me. That snowman. It's not normal. We'll work through this together. I suggest you rest as much as possible, and perhaps take some medication to ease your stress. Margaret felt defeated. No one believes me, she thought, but she knew she couldn't force others to believe in things that seemed inexplicable. Back home, she resolved to stay calm. She turned on some soft music, brewed herself a cup of tea, and tried to read, but no matter how hard she tried, the feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. As night fell, she made sure all windows and doors were securely locked. But even within her own home, she didn't feel safe. Margaret went to the bathroom and splashed water on her face to clear her mind. When she looked up, she was horrified to see the snowman's reflection in the mirror behind her. His hollow eyes stared at her, his twisted grin revealing sharp, stone-like teeth. She spun around, but there was no one there. Her heart raced as she stumbled backward, falling to the cold floor. This has to stop, she cried, tears streaming down her face. Over the next few days, her condition worsened. She couldn't sleep, had no appetite, and her health visibly declined. People in town began to notice her deteriorating appearance. Margaret doesn't look well, Mrs. Helen commented to Mr. Peterson. Should we do something? I'll stop by and check on her, he offered. When he arrived at her house, Margaret answered the door, looking worn and frail. Hello, Mrs. Margaret. I came to see if you needed any help. Thank you, but I'm fine, she replied, her voice weak. You don't seem well. Should I call the doctor? No need. I just need some rest. Mr. Peterson looked around, noticing the cold, gloomy atmosphere in the house. Is there something wrong with your fireplace? It's so cold in here. It's working, but I don't know why it's so cold, she sighed. Let me check it for you. He walked over to the fireplace and saw the fire burning normally. Odd, maybe there's an issue with the insulation. Perhaps. As he prepared to leave, he glanced out the window and noticed the snowman in her yard. That snowman. Are you keeping it? Margaret shivered. I can't destroy it. It won't be destroyed. Mr. Peterson frowned. If you want, I can help you. No, don't touch it, she cried, startling him. All right, I'm sorry. After he left, Margaret sat down, overwhelmed by feelings of helplessness and isolation. What am I supposed to do? No one can help me. That night, she resolved to confront her fear. She sat in her living room with the lights on, clutching her late husband's old Bible. She recited prayers, hoping to find some comfort. But as the clock struck midnight, the lights flickered and went out. Darkness once again enveloped her. Footsteps echoed, louder this time, as if someone was pacing within the house. She held the Bible tightly, trying to stay calm. "Margaret," the voice whispered, closer than ever. "Who are you? What do you want from me?" She screamed. "I'm lonely. Stay with me. Forever." The voice echoed from all directions. She felt a chilling cold envelop her, as though she was surrounded by ice. Her breathing grew shallow, and she collapsed to the floor. Before she lost consciousness, she saw the hollow eyes of the snowman, watching her from within the darkness. The sky over North Dakota was dark and ominous, with thick black clouds blotting out the sun, casting a cold and heavy atmosphere over everything. Margaret awoke on the cold floor, feeling exhausted and sore all over. She managed to sit up, looking around to realize that the electricity was back on. Yet the house remained unusually cold. "Last night, it couldn't have been real," she murmured to herself, though the memories of that whispering voice and the haunting image of the snowman remained vivid. She decided she could no longer face this alone. "I need help," she called the local sheriff, James Miller. "Hello, Sheriff Miller? This is Margaret Thompson. I need to see you immediately." "Hello, Mrs. Margaret. Is everything all right?" His voice held a hint of concern. "Please come to my house. Something very strange is happening." "All right, I'll be there in a few minutes." About 15 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. Margaret opened it to welcome Sheriff Miller inside. "Thank you for coming. Of course, you don't look well. What's going on?" he asked, sensing the unusual coldness of the house. She recounted everything: the mysterious snowman, the strange occurrences in her home, the nightmares, and the whispering voice. Sheriff Miller listened intently, his brow furrowing in concern. "Mrs. Margaret, I understand that you're under a lot of stress, but this might be affecting your health. Have you seen a doctor?" "I went to see Dr. Collins, but he couldn't help. I'm not imagining these things. That snowman, it can't be destroyed, and it's haunting me." Sheriff Miller sighed. "All right, let's go have a look at this snowman." The two stepped outside to the front yard. The snowman still stood there, but it seemed more ominous than before. His hollow eyes appeared even deeper, and the twisted smile revealed sharp, jagged stones for teeth. "It's definitely an unusual snowman," he observed. "Who made it?" "I don't know. It appeared on Christmas morning, and since then, I haven't been able to destroy it." Sheriff Miller approached, touching the snowman, but immediately withdrew his hand. "That's freezing, like touching dry ice. See? That's not normal snow. All right, let me try something." Sheriff Miller retrieved a crowbar from his patrol car and struck the snowman with it. Despite his efforts, the snowman remained unscathed. "This is unbelievable," he muttered. "Maybe we need heavier equipment." "Do you believe me now?" Margaret asked, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "We'll investigate further. I'll have some officers keep watch over your house tonight." That evening, 2 officers, John and Paul, were assigned to Margaret's house. They set up surveillance cameras around the property and established a monitoring station in their patrol car. "Don't worry, ma'am. We'll be here all night," John assured her. "Thank you so much," Margaret replied, feeling slightly relieved. As night fell, Margaret tried to relax by reading a book, but she couldn't shake her fear. Outside, the wind howled, its eerie sound amplifying the tension. In the surveillance car, John and Paul watched the monitor. "Everything looks fine so far," Paul commented. "Yeah, maybe she's just really stressed," John replied. Suddenly, the screen began to flicker. The image turned fuzzy, then went completely blank. "What's going on?" Paul asked, puzzled. "I'll check the system," John said, but he couldn't find any issues. Inside the house, the lights flickered and then went out. Margaret's heart pounded. "No, This can't be happening. A loud, persistent knocking came from the door. She approached cautiously, too afraid to open it. "Who's there?" she called out. "Margaret." The familiar voice spoke, but this time it sounded closer, more distinct. She backed away, overwhelmed by fear. Suddenly, the living room window shattered, and a blast of icy wind filled the room, bringing in flurries of snow. Amid the chaos, she saw the snowman standing outside the window, its hollow eyes fixed on her. In the surveillance car, John and Paul sensed something was wrong. "Something's not right. Let's go in," John decided. They rushed into the house, finding the front door ajar. "Mrs. Margaret, where are you?" Paul called out. There was no response. They split up to search the house. When they reached the bedroom, they found Margaret unconscious on the floor. "Quick, call for an ambulance," John shouted. Paul radioed the station while John checked Margaret's condition. "She's breathing, but barely." Margaret was taken to the hospital, where doctors diagnosed her with severe physical and mental exhaustion. She needed rest and treatment. Meanwhile, Sheriff Miller continued his investigation. He reviewed the footage from the surveillance cameras but found nothing unusual. "This doesn't make sense." The cameras malfunctioned right when the incident happened. He decided to consult Father Thomas, the local priest, for advice. "Father Thomas, can you help us make sense of these strange occurrences?" Sheriff Miller asked after explaining the situation. Father Thomas pondered the situation. "Some things cannot be explained by science. Perhaps there is a spirit or entity haunting Mrs. Margaret. So what can we do? I suggest we visit her home and perform a cleansing ritual." The following day, Father Thomas, Sheriff Miller, and several officers returned to Margaret's house. They began a ritual, praying and sprinkling holy water throughout the house. As they approached the snowman, Father Thomas sensed an overwhelming negative energy. "This entity is not of this world," he said. He proceeded with the ritual in front of the snowman. But suddenly, a fierce wind began to blow. With no apparent cause, the snow around them spiraled upward, forming a vortex that encircled them. "Stay back," Sheriff Miller yelled, struggling to keep his footing. In the midst of the chaos, the snowman began to melt, but not into water. It dissolved into a dark mist, swirling around them before disappearing into the sky. Everything returned to normal. The wind calmed, and the snow stopped falling. "What just happened?" asked one of the officers, his face pale. "The entity has been banished," Father Thomas replied, though his voice betrayed a hint of worry. "But I can't be sure it's gone for good." At the hospital, Margaret gradually recovered. When she heard about what had happened, she felt relieved yet still uneasy. "Is it really over?" she asked Sheriff Miller when he visited. "We did everything we could. The snowman is gone, and hopefully, you won't be troubled anymore," he reassured her. "But I still feel like something's watching me," she whispered. "Don't worry, we'll keep monitoring the situation to make sure you're safe." In the days that followed, Margaret remained unable to shake a lingering sense of dread. Even though the snowman was gone, the nightmares persisted. She dreamed of wandering through a snow-covered maze, lost with no way out, and the snowman appearing at every turn. Her health continued to deteriorate, her spirit drained. The doctors recommended she move somewhere else for a change of scenery. "We could arrange for you to stay at a health retreat in another state," Dr. Collins suggested. "Yes, maybe that's for the best," she agreed, her voice weak. Meanwhile, rumors of the mysterious snowman spread throughout the town. People grew anxious and afraid. Some speculated that Margaret's home was cursed. "We should stay away from that place," Mrs. Helen told her neighbors. "Something's not right there." Margaret prepared to leave. Before she got into the car, she took one last look at her house. "I hope things get better," she thought, but as the car began to pull away, she glanced in the rearview mirror and caught sight of a familiar figure. The snowman stood silently by the side of the road, its hollow eyes watching her. Startled, she turned around, but there was nothing there. "It's just my imagination," she tried to reassure herself, yet the chill lingered. In the last days in North Dakota, the sky remained perpetually overcast, mirroring Margaret's heavy heart. Despite her decision to leave the home she had lived in for so many years, the sense of unease lingered. The nightmares continued to haunt her, and she knew she couldn't live like this any longer. She spent the entire afternoon packing. Memories, both joyful and painful, resurfaced with each item, yet she pushed them aside, focused on her goal. "I have to leave before it's too late," she told herself. As the sun began to set, Margaret prepared for her final night in the house. She locked the windows, drew the curtains tightly, and lit an old oil lamp. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying flurries of snow that drifted aimlessly through the air. Sitting at the dining table with a cup of hot tea, she heard a faint sound outside. The crunching of footsteps on the snow drifted through the stillness. Her heart began to race, but she tried to ignore it. "It's only the wind," she whispered to herself, attempting to stay calm. But the sound grew louder, closer. Unable to sit still, she rose and moved toward the window, gently pulling back the curtain. In the dim light of the street lamp, she saw a familiar shape. The mysterious snowman stood directly in front of her door, closer than it had ever been. Its hollow eyes stared back at her, and its twisted grin widened as if in greeting. "It can't be. I thought it was gone," she whispered, a chill spreading over her. She quickly shut the curtains. A soft knocking began at the door, steady and haunting. "Margaret!" The familiar whisper echoed from the other side of the door. She clutched her chest, taking deep, measured breaths. "Tomorrow I'll leave. This will all be over," she reassured herself, determined to remain calm. That entire night, she couldn't sleep. The wind howled through the cracks, and branches scraped against the windows, creating an eerie symphony. But she decided she wouldn't let fear rule her any longer. The following morning, the sky was mysteriously clear. The weak winter sun cast a peaceful glow over the landscape. Margaret loaded her luggage into the car, took one last look at her home, and shut the door behind her. There was a pang of sadness as she closed it. This house held so many memories with her late husband. "Goodbye," she murmured softly. She climbed into her car, started it up, and began to drive away. As she passed the gate, she glanced back at the yard. The snowman was gone, with only a blank expanse of snow where it had stood. "Finally, it's over," she sighed, a wave of relief washing over her. Margaret's house was soon sold to a young couple from the city, eager to begin their new life in the small town. They were unaware of the strange events that had taken place. "The house feels so cozy," Sarah, the wife, said to her husband. "I think we'll be really happy here." "Me too," Michael smiled. "Let's start decorating for Christmas." In the days that followed, they encountered no unusual phenomena. There was no mysterious snowman, no strange noises. Their laughter and happiness filled the house with warmth and life. As for Margaret, she moved to a small town down south, where the climate was warmer and there was no snow. First, she found a sense of peace in her new life. She made friends with her friendly neighbors, joined community events, and gradually rediscovered joy. However, on quiet nights when darkness fell, the nightmares would return. She dreamed of wandering through an endless field of snow, surrounded by shadowy darkness. The snowman, with its hollow eyes, would appear, drawing closer and whispering words she couldn't understand. She would wake up in a cold sweat. "No, I left that place behind," she would say, her breath heavy with fear. The feeling of being watched also lingered. When she took walks along the quiet paths, she sensed unseen eyes following her. But whenever she turned around, there were only trees, silent under the sunlight. She decided to see a local psychologist, Dr. Emily Harper, for help. "What you're experiencing could be a result of trauma," Dr. Harper said, after listening to her story. We need to work together to confront and overcome these fears. Margaret agreed to attend therapy sessions. Gradually, she learned to face her past and her fears. Yet, despite all her efforts, the image of the mysterious snowman still lingered in her mind. As time passed, the story of the mysterious snowman in North Dakota became a local legend. People would tell tales of the woman haunted by a strange snowman, as a reminder of the unexplained mysteries in life. Some believed that the snowman represented loneliness and guilt. Perhaps, they speculated, Margaret had unwittingly done something in her past, and the snowman had come to remind her. Others thought it was the restless spirit of someone seeking solace, but no one knew the truth. One afternoon, as the sunset painted the sky red, Margaret sat on a park bench, watching children play. Their laughter brought a warm smile to her face, filling her with a quiet contentment. Suddenly, she noticed a young boy shaping a figure in the sand. The figure reminded her of that snowman from long ago. A chill crept over her, but this time, she didn't run. She stood up and walked over to the boy. "What are you making?" she asked gently. "I'm making a sandman." The boy smiled. "Do you want to help?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Sure, let's make it together." As she helped the boy mold the sand figure, Margaret felt a part of her fear begin to dissolve. Perhaps facing her past and accepting it was the only way to find peace. The story ends with an image of Margaret sitting beside the young boy, both laughing together. Though the haunting memories remain, she had learned to coexist with them and find happiness in life's simple moments. The mysterious snowman in North Dakota became a distant memory, a part of her past, though no one would ever truly explain the strange phenomenon. It served as a reminder that some mysteries in life are never fully solved.